Here we are again. I was looking at the reading, the topic for today, and the sermon series, and it seemed a little familiar. And then I realised that it wasn't the first time Andrew had gone away from the new year, leaving me to preach about Epiphany, which posed a dilemma. Do I cheat and read my sermon from then? Well, you'll have to look up the old sermons on YouTube to find out if I gave in to the temptation. So tomorrow is Epiphany, also known as Little Christmas, and it celebrates a number of different things. In the Western tradition, it primarily relates to the visit of the Magi to the infant Jesus, representing Jesus' manifestation to the Gentiles. One meaning of Epiphany is appearance or manifestation of the divine. In some Celtic or Amish communities, Little Christmas is celebrated as a feast day, with celebrations and exchanging of gifts, in memory of the gifts brought to Jesus by the Magi. In the Eastern tradition of the Christian Church, Epiphany commemorates the baptism of Jesus in the River Jordan and the subsequent anointing by God's dove, with that event marking Jesus' manifestation to the world as the Son of God. However, our sermon series takes its subtitle from a related but different meaning of Epiphany, an awakening to or a realization of something, with today being specifically about grace. The reading we just heard brings us around in a circle, though, to the idea of Jesus being revealed to the Gentiles, with Paul making the profound statement that through God's grace, God's favour, God's goodwill, the message of Jesus was meant for all people, not just a select group of people. Let's look back at the story of the Magi. Matthew tells us that these Magi came from the east, following a star. Magi literally means wise men, and was originally a Persian word, but was used throughout the ancient world to refer to astrologers, magicians, sorcerers, pagan priests. In fact, our word magician has its root in the singular form of magi, magus. These were not the sort of people that an Orthodox Jew would associate with. So the question is this: how did these foreigners know to look for Jesus? The answer: God had spoken to them. An answer that is completely at odds with everything the Jews of Joseph and Mary's time, and later, thought to be true. But this shouldn't be a surprise to us, to Christians who have studied Jesus' life. How many times did Jesus associate with foreigners, with unclean people, with pagans? We celebrate the Epiphany, the manifestation of Jesus to the Gentiles, the revelation of God's grace, God's love, God's forgiveness of all people, not just the Jews. But really, God had already revealed themselves to others, to the pagan astrologers of the East, to the Celts of the West, to the Jews' own neighbours in Samaria. And God is still revealing themselves today. Here we see the rich meaning of the Epiphany, the feast of the manifestation, the celebration of the shining forth of God. The light of Christ continues to be revealed within each one of us, in that mysterious place called our heart. This, our tradition tells us, is called the soul. This enlightened heart, rather than the physical organ, is what we are called to nurture through our spiritual practice. When we pay attention to this light, nurture it, tend to that sacred flame in our souls, we begin to recognize that the light within us is drawn toward the source that gave birth to it. Like a compass that turns north, our hearts are drawn toward God because our souls long for wholeness, for rest in the source that gives them life. This, I believe, is true whether we are Christian, Muslim, Jew, or dare I say it, atheist. And that, I believe, is another epiphany, the realization that not only is God's grace for all people, but that it is in all people. A subtle but definite distinction. Our faith yearns to delve deeper than the consumer mentality of Christmas, to ponder the images of Christ's birth, that coming of God through Christ in our lives every day. Ultimately, our Christian practice of faith invites us to embody Christ in our lives, to be God-bearers. The Epiphany is like the poetry underneath the images of Christmas. It is an intense, focused gaze at light itself, which spreads throughout all life as it draws all life toward wholeness. This feast of light shows us how God's grace is manifested in all of us, of how our hearts are gifted with the presence of Christ. A gift, one might say a great power that comes with great responsibility. When we become aware of our own gifts, our powers, as our hearts are filled with gratitude for our own enlightenment, as it were, we offer these gifts back to God. And this is the deep truth of the Epiphany, as we see embodied in the Magi themselves. These mysterious people, we don't know how many, there were only that they brought 3 gifts. Personally, I imagine there were quite a few on that holy road trip. Having noticed the light in the sky, something in their hearts resonated with this awareness, and they were drawn toward it, carried out of their comfort zones, away from their normal patterns, into what would have been a risky journey. Why would they do this? To go to the source. The compasses of their souls were fixed on the light, and they set out on their journey. And having arrived at the source, as it were, they did the most natural thing possible. Out of the devotion of their own hearts, they offered gifts back to the one who gives life and light to all people, through whom all things were made, as the Creed envisions. So what does all this mean? These words and images. How does this image of light, the idea of the revelation of God's grace to all of us, actually fit into our busy, consumer-driven, competitive lives, you may wonder. Not well, I would say. What does it matter to us? Our faith journey calls us always to honour the presence of God in every person we meet, even as we live into our vocation as light bearers in the world. Some may hear such words of light, practice of prayer, being a God bearer, living from the heart, etc., and think it is all just a bunch of fluff. We're just those liberal snowflakes after all. But through a deeper reflection on the light of Christ, the revelation of God's grace in all of us, the way our hearts are attuned to the presence of God, and how we are prompted to share those gifts with the world, I would argue there is nothing more important to reflect on. Just look at the news today to see what happens when we ignore this truth or reject it in favour of greed, arrogance and warped power. This is what happens when we unleash our egos and live by our own truths rather than God's grace. So seek out the light, keep your eyes open to see it, and your hearts open to follow it. Consent to where it takes you. Take the risk to step out onto new horizons, being led back to the source from which we all come. Share the gifts God has given you with the community and the world. Pay homage to the one from whom all comes and to whom all returns. And never give up hope, even when you stumble. I've stumbled many times. For God will continue to call willing souls onto paths of awareness and transformation, following yonder star. God will continue to create new epiphanies each and every day. Amen.